We do have a ton to get through in this episode.
Common sense is finally prevailing.
There was controversy this month, Dave.
I'm not particularly excited by that.
Secrets and things on set.
I haven't told them anything.
I think this is just good times all round.
Every Doctor Who is liked by somebody, and that's a really good thing.
Davo, my doctor.
I know we disagree on this one.
First world problems, Dave.
I get why fans are asking those questions.
Oh gosh, that's actually quite a lot to talk about.
It doesn't compute.
It's the elephant in the room.
That's okay.
Fandom versus the BBC.
The cardinal sin.
Moving along.
Lunch.
G'day, I'm Rob.
And g'day, I'm Dave.
And you're listening to the Doctor Who Show, where, for the first time in a very long time, I'm appearing on a January monthly episode. This is weird, Dave. I'm normally sunning myself and drinking pina coladas and letting you and the Melbourne crew run riot this time of year. But here I am.
Well, you're now getting the Melbourne crew semi-regularly doing the gin and TARDIS, so we've called you back out, Rob. But yes, welcome to the height of summer. We're recording this between Christmas and Australia Day, which is basically when our entire country shuts down. But we've been making use of this time, Rob.
Yeah, we've had a big month already with a List Makers episode on our top nostalgic stories, and also two episodes of Alternate Galaxies, one on Stranger Things and one on Star Trek Deep Space Nine. We've never done two Alternate Galaxies in the same month.
No, but Stranger Things did wrap up. It was a fairly big deal out there in pop culture land, so we talked about that, and you just happened to finish watching Deep Space Nine, and we were sitting here with a very lazy summer, so we did it. And look, I enjoyed both of them. I particularly enjoyed the Deep Space Nine one. We did a solid 90 minutes there, but still I walked away going, there's more I could have said about the Defiant, and I didn't say anything about Odo's past and what went on there, and we could have done another 90 minutes easily, but we didn't. They're both there for you to listen to as nice little one-offs.
Yeah, it's always the way. We also caught up in person last week, Dave. We put a picture up on social media. We had a meal. We talked about the year ahead and what we're going to do. Always a good time to see you.
Yeah, no, it's always fun. I try once a year to catch up with you in Sydney, and it's just nice to chat. I mean, you say we sat there and plotted out our year. That was 10% of the conversation. It was just a fun catch-up.
It was. Now, before we move on to some news, we always say if we see a review out there of the podcast, it'll get read at the start of the show as a thank you to whoever left it. So we've got a few this time, Dave. I might lead us off. The first one is, love the show, 5 stars by Billy and Belinda from the United Kingdom on iTunes. And they say, only recently discovered this podcast, but already on my immediate go-to list. The occasional shorter episodes, like List Makers, are a great bonus to go along with the longer standard ones. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. We also had one that starts off brilliant 2 stars by Suds67 from the UK on iTunes. Keep up the great work. Really enjoy all you do. Through thick and thin, you seem to be there for me. Insightful, reflective and intelligent comment make you essential listening. Thank you so much, Suds.
What does it take to get the extra 3 stars, Suds?
Yeah, very harsh market, but thank you for the comments.
Yes. And I also want to give a special mention to Syndex101 on X, because you might recall, dear listener, in a recent episode I said, wouldn't it be great if someone in, an obscure country, because we see where we get listened to, and there are some very obscure countries in the list, and I said, wouldn't it be great if someone in a Finnish forest said they listened to us? Syndex 101's come through in a way. He said on X, so you said I'd like to hear from someone listening in a forest in Finland. Well, I started listening in a forest in Vantaa, my wife's home, but when I got to that line, I was actually in an office in Gibraltar, my home. Does that do it?
Yeah, that's pretty impressive. Thanks for mentioning that. I have been to Finland, but I can't say I've been to Vantaa, so I hope it's a lovely part of the world. I'm sure it is. I really, really liked Finland. I also just want to mention, Rob, we did get a very detailed shout-out from our friends over at the Pull to Open podcast who were discussing my favourite story, Doctor Who and the Silurians, and Pete went into some great depth about what we'd been saying, bigging up Season 7 on our List Makers and how that gelled with his thoughts on the story. So thanks, Pete, from Pull to Open.
Oh, very, very nice. Shall we move on to some news?
We have got a bit of news, Rob.
Peter Capaldi has made it into the news lately with various comments. He was on a podcast called Half the Picture, which normally gets in the low hundreds to low thousands of views for its episodes, but the Capaldi episode's got about 50,000 views, so the guy who runs that channel must be delighted. It's a really great interview I recommend to you. And he's also had a chat with the Mirror newspaper. Yes, the same one Doctor Who fans hate for its track record of breaking Doctor Who news they don't want to believe, but let's park that. And Capaldi gave the Mirror a really fascinating perspective on Doctor Who in an historical sense. And I think we've said in the past that as a fan, and quite a fan, I think back in the 70s, Capaldi does have this really solid view of the show as someone who's been around the block once or twice. Anyway, let me read you this quote, Dave, about the modern show from Capaldi. Quote, "The show became very, very big, and it was never like that when I loved it. It became a different thing. I think the responsibilities of playing the part became more. There were more things you had to do rather than just like in the old days, if you were John Pertwee or Tom Baker, you spent most of your year making it and then a bit of the year promoting it. But it wasn't this in-your-face kind of thing that suddenly was really important to the BBC, or suddenly a really important to the brand thing that had to be maintained. It was just a show that some kids loved and other kids didn't care about and wanted to watch football or they grew out of. And then it became this sort of very important thing. I think less in a cultural way and more in an economic way. I think the show is a victim of its success. The show that I loved was a tiny thing, a little small thing that survived. It just survived. But nobody knew that it was warming its way into the culture in such a deep way. And I think that's what I have an affinity with." End quote.
I partially agree with the great Mr. Capaldi. I don't think Doctor Who was necessarily a small show in terms of viewer engagement. I think that Doctor Who, at its peaks, whether that's Dalek Mania, whether that's the late Barry Letts into the Hinchcliffe era, was a phenomenon and was very, very well known and well regarded, and that's why it's a cultural phenomenon today. But Capaldi is right in terms of the fact that now everything in the world is more expensive, more glitzy, more instant. People dive deeper. People get more obsessed with things, and so I think that, you know, whether it's following football or whether it's following Doctor Who, whether it's following conspiracy theories online, people do blow things up bigger and become more obsessive and sometimes a little bit more culty. And I think that that's what Capaldi's referring to. And in that, I think he's absolutely right. And I think that that's the same across many, many TV shows, films, books, religions, whatever you sport, whatever you like, yeah.
Yeah, I had a sense of that some years ago, back when the Big Chief company still existed, who made the 12-inch figures, the Doctor Who dolls. And most of the living doctors and companions and things had done signature editions of them, but they could never get Capaldi to do a signature edition of them. And it's not that Capaldi doesn't like signing autographs. If you write to Peter Capaldi, his address is out there on the internet, he will write back in time and send you a postcard that he has signed. He's done it for me. I know he does it. He doesn't have a problem with signatures, but I think he had a problem with that sort of more corporate, let's charge hundreds of pounds for this doll just because it's got a little plaque that I've signed. He never did that. And that was one of my insights into how Capaldi might feel about the commercialisation of Doctor Who, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's right. And it's nice that he cares enough about the show to make comments like that I think are thoughtful and honest and worth pondering.
Yeah, he's a good guy.
Let's go back to the other end of the Doctor Who history cast, because we've also had some interviews in the Radio Times by the wonderful Carol Ann Ford, who has said a couple of things. First of all, when talking about the missing story Marco Polo, she's quoted as saying, Ford said she's mortified by the idea that the story can't be watched by fans, adding, Marco Polo, such a beautiful one, so beautiful, such a loss. Well, hopefully it's not lost forever. And just sort of highlighting the fact that she would really like to see that story again. And as I posited on a couple of recent episodes, it's rumoured to be out there so often. I was actually having this conversation with our friend Simon from Flight for Entirety when I was in Sydney as well. And I said, you know, I want to have it right at the top of my list of episodes I believe are out there and do exist, but I acknowledge that as it's the top 10 favourite story of mine, that might be a little bit of the heart over the head as well.
It could be, but it's a chance. And Film is Fabulous. The rumours are out there. They're not even rumours, really. Film is Fabulous have said they've picked up some big collections of late. I think we're on the verge of getting something.
Yeah, the rumours out there are certainly growing that we could be getting something, maybe even by the time we get to our February episode. Who knows? Caroline Ford did go on to talk a bit more about William Hartnell, and if you want to read all of her comments, I do encourage you to go and check out those articles on the Radio Times. But she did say during the interview that she reflected on her earliest days at the BBC Sci-Fi, including her first impressions of iconic actor Hartnell. I thought he was adorable, she said. He was very charming, very sweet, very considerate, and took it all very seriously, which I approved of. I don't like people messing about and giggling. They've got to take the work seriously. She added, the part was so important to him. It was everything to him, and because of that, he was a real perfectionist with it. And Rob, I read that and I just thought, that's such a lovely summation, I think, of Hartnell, and you often get these very different views of Hartnell the man, but I think that Caroline Ford really nails it, that if you took the craft as seriously as he did and you had that sort of professional outlook and cared about the show, you probably did get on with him. And if you're a more lackadaisical sort of actor, or you just came from a different sort of background, maybe you didn't.
Yeah, no, that was a lovely interview. And she also spoke a bit about her and Bill allegedly putting together a backstory for the Doctor and Susan. Now, how much of that is real and how much might be pure BS? I'm not sure. We're talking about something that happened in 1963 with a man who's been dead for over 50 years. But it was a lovely little story that they allegedly put together for their backstory.
It was. You've got some more contemporary news for us, Rob.
I do, Dave. The war between land and sea has come and gone with barely a whimper. And as we've said before on this very show, without the worldwide backing of podcasts and video makers, or even just the worldwide interest from the fandom, it really felt like a wet fart. No pun intended, didn't it? I mean, who would have thought if you cut off the worldwide audience of a show and just left it with one rainy little island, I mean, apologies to our UK friends, that you'd have something that didn't move the needle at all in pop culture? And from what commentary I saw about it, even people who were interested and enthusiastic and wanted to really support it all seemed to become somewhat half-hearted the longer it went on, and perhaps the sillier it got.
I've certainly seen people who enjoyed the whole thing and were very strong across the way. I've seen some people who liked the way it ended, but I think the average comment that I've said, whilst more impressed at the start, perhaps was a little less impressed with the back half. As you say, I think, look, inevitably, if you are not broadcasting this around the world, you are more than halving the number of people who are having conversations online in one form or another about it, and that just means that the conversations get muted, and particularly in the age of algorithms, if less people are replying to each other and commenting, it drifts away from being put in front of you. So that's just a reality of this bizarre decision to split the screenings between the UK and the rest of the world. I note that as of the time of recording, we still don't have a release date for the rest of the world from Disney Plus, which means it's not coming out in February, and if we haven't started getting trailers now, probably not in March. So I think, Rob, you said middle of the year is looking about right.
Well, that's what, again, those dastardly newspapers that no one wants to believe. Middle of last year, they were saying, it's not going to air until the middle of next year. So maybe that still will come true. Yeah,
if it was to screen around about Easter or just after, which would be roughly a year after the end of the last season of Doctor Who, that would make perfect sense to me. It is very interesting, though. We talk about whether it was a success or not, Rob, and it's very hard for us to judge as we haven't seen it. We're just going on conversations that friends overseas are having. But the ratings have come in, and however you cut it up, I think it's fair to say that it was more successful in the ratings than the second season of Gatwa Who, but not as successful in the ratings as the first season of Gatwa Who. Now, however you cut that up, whether that's overnights, plus sevens, or whatever, that seems to be a pretty accurate statement. This has led some people to speculate as to whether making Doctor Who-like science fiction without the Doctor Who branding was advantageous to it, or is it simply that going out over a dark, wet Christmas in the UK over 3 nights meant that it was much easier to get those ratings. I don't know. I haven't seen it. I can't judge. I'm reporting the figures.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because the first season of Ncuti Gatwa Doctor Who wasn't exactly a ratings smash. So, there's that too.
No, it is in that sort of difficult to judge zone where it's certainly not a complete flop, but was it a massive success either? Probably not. And beyond that, it's really hard to judge. Rob, I've got a very quick new one that I need to add in. This broke yesterday.
Ooh, okay.
Some months ago, I mentioned that Amazon had 3 untitled Doctor Who novelizations coming up as being on sale in July. We now have those identities. We can confirm, as we speculated, the Matt Jones one is going to be a novelisation by him of the Satan Pit, a favourite story of both of us, Rob, so very much looking forward to that. Matt Jones being a favourite author of mine from the New Adventures. We are also getting Aliens of London by Joseph Lidster and Time of Angels by Jenny T. Colgan.
I wonder how they pick these, Dave. They seem very random.
Yeah, I wonder if it's what they can get the rights to. Is it what
Right.
is it what authors are interested in writing? Did they go to Joseph Lidster and say, "What do you want to write about?" He said, "I want to do Aliens of London." They've gone, "Great, do it." I don't know, but they are the titles. I'm very much looking forward to the Satan Pit. It is out on the 14th of July.
Yeah, very, very good. And yeah, it is weird. I mean, Aliens of London, who would have picked that out of other options you have, even in just that first season of Doctor Who?
I don't know.
Yeah, interesting. Folks, we would normally go to short topics here, but we're not going to tonight to give over more time to our main topic, which it was remiss of me, Dave. I didn't even mention it at the start of the show, although anyone who's seen the subject line of this podcast will see that it's our Ask Us Anything episode where we went out recently and said, hey guys, ask us anything, and we got a bunch of questions.
Very quickly, within 48 hours, we got pages and pages of questions.
Yeah, to the degree that I didn't really pursue it very hard on social media because I thought, oh geez, we've already got quite a lot already. Thank
you to everybody who sent stuff in. This will be a lot of things to talk about. But yes, we are skipping short topics this time, partly to make way for all of your great questions, partly because it's been the Christmas period, it's been summer, and I've been catching up on a lot of non-Doctor Who things over summer, which we'll talk about in our What Have We Been Watching later on.
And we also have a lot of listener feedback at the end of the show too.
We do, so we will fill up the episode without any problems.
Oh yeah, don't you worry, sit back, relax, and off we go. Should I kick us off, Dave?
Oh, why not?
Anthony Carroll has written in, what is your one favourite Doctor Who episode? And by episode, I think he might mean story. If you can only watch one again. Dave, what's yours?
Well, I took Anthony at his literal word and went for episode.
No. Okay.
And I thought very hard about it, because obviously, you go, what's your favourite Doctor Who story? And I go, the Silurians. Is there one episode from that I would pick above all the others? And probably not. And then I thought about some other options, and I ended up landing on one that I'm very, very fond of. It's got my childhood favourite Doctor in it. It's got some Doctor Who morals and messaging. It's got some great guest stars. It's got some cool plots. It's got some explosions. And it's got lots of dinosaurs. And that is Invasion of the Dinosaurs Part 6. That episode just makes me so happy. I thought if I could only watch one ever again, it would be Invasion of the Dinosaurs Part 6.
Okay. I found this actually really hard because I kept going through all the stories, because I was going for stories, not just episodes, Dave. And I thought, what do I really love here? And the problem was there was almost nothing that I couldn't live without, which I guess is what happens when you've watched stuff a million times. So I reframed the question in my mind to be, what's the story in this list that I can put on any time, in any mood, and just be happy watching? Surely that would have to be a favourite episode. And with that thinking, I landed on Remembrance of the Daleks. Maybe tomorrow it would be Pyramids of Mars or something, but today it's Remembrance of the Daleks, and I feel okay with that.
Yeah, I can't argue with that. That's a very good choice.
Alrighty.
Thank you, Anthony. Our next Ask Us Anything question comes from Dylan Mooney, who says, if you had to radically alter a piece of Who history which dramatically changed the direction the show was going in at that point, where would you intervene and why?
My gut reaction was to do something radical in the 80s and, in quotation marks, save the show. Like have Davo go for another year or two or whatever. But I think the die was pretty much cast. The show had cruised past 20 years. It needed a rest at some point. That was always going to happen. So I'm going to go in a similar direction, but at a different time in the show's history. And that's returning to something I said around the time Capaldi was ending, that the show had run out of steam and should take a break. I would alter history to have Capaldi start regenerating in the Doctor Falls. I thought there'd be stars. Maybe jump to that line from the actual regeneration episode, Doctor, I let you go. And boom, the end. And if that was the end of Doctor Who for all time, I think I'd like that. But I don't think it would be the end of Doctor Who. If we had just rested the show then, we would have avoided that lurch into the Chibnall era, like, oh God, let's make less episodes, but I need more time to write them. We wouldn't have had the controversial Doctor choice. It was the beginning of the show getting sucked into the culture wars big time. We would have avoided that. It had a lot of lore no one asked for getting added. All of that would have been avoided. Of course, no Ncuti Gatwa following on from there. And then, almost a decade along, perhaps we could have had the show return this year or next year with something new and fresh, maybe with a young showrunner, not a 62-year-old man who thinks he knows what Dayoof want, and have 10 years of expectation from the audience built in. How about that?
That is definitely a radical departure from the history of the show, Rob.
Thank you.
That is definitely dramatic. You have understood and delivered on the brief there. I don't know if I agree, because there's enough, certainly in the Chibnall era and probably in the Gateway era, that I like and I would still want to see. So, but I understand the logic, and as a hypothetical exercise, it's an interesting one. I like what you've posed.
What are you up to?
I'm going back to late 2004, and I'm sitting down with Russell T Davies after he has been commissioned to put together and make Doctor Who. And I would say, change nothing you're doing in terms of the cast and the stories except this. Make it a hard reset. Make Christopher Eccleston's Doctor explicitly the first Doctor, and have a completely clean slate after that. The first time he meets the Daleks is the first time the Doctor has met the Daleks, and you can create the Daleks to be anything you want. The first time he meets the Master is the first time in his history he's met the Master, and you can make him his school chum, his brother, his lover, whatever you want to do. The Cybermen, when they're created in Season 2, that could just be the origin story. Don't feel the need to try and retcon it, squeeze it in with 26 years of history and the new adventures. Start with a blank slate. And I'd say to Russell, this will make life a little bit harder with some fans at first, who will expect a continuity, who will be judging everything between what's come before and what's come next, and the first encounter with the Daleks in the first series was better, and I like the Master here. But the casual audience won't care that Eccleston is Doctor number 1, not Doctor number 9. And trust me, in 5 years' time, and 10 years' time, and 20 years' time, people will thank you for having a fresh slate and not making their whole television show have to match 60 years of continuity.
It's a bold move, Dave. I mean, would he want to be the man who killed the original Master and the first Dalek story? It's a heavy thing to have on your shoulders.
Well, they've been dead since 1989, so I don't know. And look, this is what I say. I'm not saying it would have been an easy choice. I'm not saying it would have gone down uncontroversially. I think it would have been quite controversial, but I think that whilst you can get away with sort of harking back a bit to the old series for a few years, the longer you go on, the bigger that ball and chain of continuity is. And frankly, I like the idea of seeing a new conception of the Master, seeing a new conception of the Daleks. Maybe they look the same. Maybe you go, I'm keeping the classic look. Maybe they're still coming from a planet called Skaro. But they don't have to have been designed by Davros, for example. Do what you want.
Okay. Our friends in Scotland at the Too Broad and Too Deep podcast ask, if the main series were to be actually on hiatus, what format would you think is best to help continue the series and keep the flame alive like the Virgin New Adventures did in the 90s?
Yeah, look, thanks, guys, for this question, because it really did make me think. And obviously they are a very good podcast that talks about the Virgin New Adventures in order, so they have a vested interest there, and I have a vested love of them. But the more I thought about it, the more I just thought you probably couldn't succeed with a New Adventures type range now in the way you could in the early 90s, because there are different types of fans you're trying to appeal to keep the show going. You've got the classic fans like us that grew up with the series and read New Adventures in the Wilderness Years, but you've also got the fans who have come to the show in some cases with Shooty Goa. How do you satisfy them all with a range of books? And you probably can't. I also don't think that books are nearly as big a seller as they used to be. The world has sort of sadly moved on a bit from book ranges. So I think you're doing something online. I think that if you're trying to keep the flame alive, you're probably doing reels of some sort. You are doing, let's learn about this thing in a reel. You're doing, let's flash back to a classic moment in a reel. You're doing interviews with actors and actresses and behind-the-scenes people in reels, and something that can be put on Instagram and other social media, TikTok for those whose workplaces allow it. Mine doesn't, and that's probably for the best. I just think that if you want to keep things alive, that's the way to do it. And it's not a way that I would personally find satisfactory, but the brief from them is keep the flame alive, and that's what I would do. Yeah, look, I concur with you as much as I love novels too, especially that whole 90s era of tie-in books where every franchise had shelves of them in sci-fi bookstores. God, I love that, Dave. I know you loved it too. I did, yeah, just magical times.
Yeah, I think the modern audience does engage with novels in a different way. You see that with how few Doctor Who novels get published now and how cautiously they get published.
Yeah.
I think, and I've gone in a bit of a different direction because I still want to make a sort of a show. And I think the direction in 2026 is animation. And not the cheap stuff like we get on DVDs. I mean, properly done animation, good art direction, strong voice casting, all of that. It's cheaper than live action. It's not cheap, I know that, but it's more sustainable than live action on the bottom line. And I think you can do really interesting stuff. Depending on the style, I think you're probably looking at half the cost, maybe less, of making TV live action Doctor Who. But even more importantly, I think it would just feel like something genuinely new and interesting, not just a stopgap, even though it kind of is a stopgap. It would feel like this new thing, and I think people would be interested in animation.
Yeah, that was something that crossed my mind as well. So yeah, I think that could absolutely work.
Cool.
We have a question here from Terry Sharp, who asks, is there a podcast you use for inspiration or based yourself on when you started?
Not really. When I first started podcasting, it was called The Comic Book Show, and I did it solo, which was different to anything I listened to. Then I made Who Wars, where I was stitching together segments from different people to make a magazine kind of show. That wasn't modelled on anything I listened to either. And that's really weird because all along I really liked the idea of a show that had two people talking to one another, and yet I kept making all these other things. Even when I started this show, the first 6 months I didn't have a fixed co-host either, and that changed when I made your acquaintance, Dave, and I'm glad we teamed up. I don't think we ever sat down once we teamed up and said, oh, let's be like XYZ podcast. But if I could compare us to a podcast, I gave this a bit of thought. I think it would be something like Rebel Force Radio, which is a long-running Star Wars podcast. You might not have even heard of them, Dave. No. Which goes to show how we're not copying them, because if you've never heard of them. But in terms of their dynamic, they're very similar to us. They've got one host who's a bit more excitable and opinionated. The other one's a bit more grounded and analytical. So at the risk of this being a very niche comment, I'll say I'm the Jimmy Mack and you're the Jason Swank. And hopefully some listeners out there will understand me when I say this.
Now I want to know which one I am.
How about you, Dave?
Yeah, I had to think about this as well. And look, as you said, Rob, there was certainly never a direct or conscious let's pinch from this or let's do this. The other thing that I really realised was that if you look at the podcasting landscape when we got started as a pair to now, a lot of the podcasts that each of us listen to now didn't exist then, and a lot of the podcasts we did listen to back then don't exist now. Yeah. We have outlasted a few, which is very natural in an amateur and hobby type of activity. I certainly need to sort of mention 42 to Doomsday because they were the first podcast where I knew the people who were actually the hosts. Rob and Mark, and they were close friends, and they had myself and our other mutual friend Richard on a couple of times in that first year to kind of get them going, and so they were sort of ones who introduced me to podcasting on a regular basis. The first podcast that I ever saw was actually one I saw live. It was called Splendid Chaps, and during the 50th anniversary. These two locals in Melbourne who'd been kicking around the comedy scene, both, in terms of professional writing, but also doing comedy shows at the Comedy Festival and fringe shows at the Fringe Festival, that sort of thing. They did these live series of podcasts. The intent was one a month about every Doctor, and ended up doing about 30 episodes. But they did them live, and they were sort of doing them in the basement of a pub. And my mate Richard said, hey, these guys are doing this thing, it's $10, why don't you come along? And I went along to their second episode and thought, that was kind of entertaining. I wonder what it sounds like as a podcast, and went and downloaded a podcast app and downloaded my first podcast and listened to it. And what both of those podcasts had in common was the idea of a couple of friends just chatting. And I think that's something that we definitely have consciously or not emulated, and so they have been an influence. I will say not Doctor Who, but when it came to doing Spacefall, Blake Seven podcast, something I pinched from Flight Through Entirety was the idea of one of the co-hosts being allocated an episode from each season, so that they were sort of the lead on that one, because when we did the Goodies Pirate podcast, we didn't do that. And when I heard what Flight Through Entirety were doing with that allocation, I thought, I wish we'd done that for the Goodies, and I'm going to do it for Spacefall. So they were a couple of inspirations.
Oh, very nice. And I remember when we started this podcast, I would hear people mention Splendid Chaps, because they'd say, oh, you're an Australian podcast, and there's also 42 to Doomsday. And I remember Splendid Chaps, and I was thinking, who the hell are these people? I've never heard one of their podcasts.
No, well, they only did them across the 50th anniversary. It was a little project for them. And then they went on and they started doing their own audio drama, which was about a time-travelling hotel or something starring one of the stars of Neighbours.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Peter Field writes, do either of you still subscribe to DWM?
The short answer, Peter, is no. I haven't for a while. I was a avid subscriber when I was a teenager, and also a subscriber to Dreamwatch later on. I was getting more into other sci-fi shows. I started to unsubscribe around the time I was moving out of home and things were becoming a bit more adult and money was becoming a bit tighter, and Doctor Who was just so dead around about that time. I picked up again when I was in the Air Force, and I spent a lot of time travelling on aeroplanes between cities and bases and doing training courses, and so I started subscribing to magazines to have something to read on planes, and did read DWM, but again, just sort of when it became very expensive to get it out here, and it was concentrating a lot more on things like Big Finish and New Who and less on Classic Who, and was also probably going for what I felt at the time was a younger audience, but probably just was the same audience as always. I was just older. I just realised that I didn't have the time and the money, so I just moved on.
Yeah, my quick answer is also no. When I was younger, I never subscribed. I just bought issues individually at the newsagent or places like Galaxy Bookshop in the city. I did subscribe for a long stretch during New Who, from the end of Tennant through Smith, Capaldi, and into Jodie's era. But two things sort of became clear over time. First, and you've touched on this, the magazine just wasn't as good as it had been, like in the 80s and 90s. Back then, it felt like the BBC wasn't micromanaging everything, trying to keep everything squeaky clean and only promoting licensed material. That's where Big Finish comes in, I guess. So during New Who, the magazine just felt more and more corporate as time went on, a little cheesy, a little try-hard. Everything was just great. And that just feels fake when everything's great, because everything is never just great,
Yeah, some of us down here in Melbourne did quite cynically start referring to it as the Cardiff Pravda. And, we'll joke about, as you said, those episode reviews of, this is one of the weaker episodes of the season where things didn't quite work and it didn't quite come together and it looked a bit cheap. 9 out of 10.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
And second, you've touched on this, was the cost. A year's subscription airmail to Australia started to get really, really insane. Yeah. And 1 year it auto-renewed on me at a completely bonkers price, and that was just the final straw. I cancelled it so that I would never get auto-renewed again. And each issue just tasted like ashes, Dave, because I knew how much I'd paid for it, and some of them I didn't even open because I was just so disgusted at how much I'd paid for this subscription, quite unwittingly. That was my last year of subscribing.
Yeah, and it wasn't just that. I mean, The Economist I used to subscribe to for years, and then I just didn't because the annual fee was just too much.
Yeah.
Our next one is from the We're All Stories in the End podcast, and they ask, least favourite story from each classic Doctor.
My list is so basic and so guessable I won't spend any time discussing it, but it's perfectly defensible, I think, and it's the Web Planet, the Dominators, the Mutants, Underworld, Time Flight, Twin Dilemma, Time and the Rani. Not sure I'll get much pushback on those, Dave.
We've got 3 snaps.
Okay.
Look, I'll start with again the really obvious and easy ones that I think most people would get. Hartnell, it's the Space Museum. It's boring. Pertwee, it's the Mutants. It's terribly made. Tom Baker, it's Underworld for all the reasons we know. McCoy, it's Time and the Rani. I feel bad about hating on it because it's sort of a fun show, but it's terribly made. Then the harder ones, I was looking at Colin and I kind of have to go Mind Warp because although when we talked about it for our deep dive a few months ago, sometime last year, I did see some of its redeemable features in the production, but it's still a nasty, horrible story that leaves me cold. So I'm going Mind Warp for the 6th Doctor. Davo, there's nothing in Davo I really hate. I don't think he's got a lot of classics either.
How dare you?
But I don't hate a lot of his era. And I thought, what's the story that I actually never bothered to buy on VHS from the Davison era, and there's just one, and it's a story that I find bland and beige and washed out and dull, and I could happily never watch it again, and that's Snake Dance, which
Wow.
shocks me because I love Kinder, and I know you really love Kinder, but I just find Snake Dance really boring, and as I said, let's say that, the wallet is talking, it's the one Davo VHS I never bothered to buy. And then you get to Troughton, and again, there's nothing I hate from Troughton. I could have said the Dominators like you, but, it was the first ever story I bought as a VHS. I remember watching it as a kid and kind of loving it. So it's a bit of what the guys at Paul Roden would call a fixed point in time. So I'm going to go for the Crotons because it is a bit rubbish.
Okay, fair enough. Holly Flynn, one of our friends on Facebook, asks, what are your least favourites in New Who and why? Your least favourite Doctor, Companion, Monster and Villain, Season, and Episode. Gosh, Holly, that's a lot of questions.
That's a lot of least. Well, Holly, you asked for it. Look, my least favourite Doctor is the 11th Doctor, Matt Smith. I started off really loving his Doctor, but as his era went on, I just found him kind of annoying. I found him difficult. I found him silly. It just didn't work for me. A lot of his stories didn't work for me. A lot of his episodes didn't work for me. So in a similar vein, my least favourite season is Series 6 of New Who. I've spoken about before, just sort of giving up on that at around about Let's Kill Hitler, just going, this is not a show that I'm enjoying or want to watch. I totally appreciate that it is doing something different and innovative, and that's a very good thing for the show to do. The problem is when you do that, sometimes it really lands for people and really misses for others, and I know that series really landed for other people, it missed for me. Least favourite Companion, I've got to go Clara. Least favourite story, Death in Heaven, just neither of those work for me. Least favourite monster or villain, I was trying to do this analytically, and then I just thought I'm just going to clear my mind and see what my gut says, and my gut said the Absorbaloff, because although the character, when he's in human form, he's actually quite sinister. Once you get to the Absorbaloff, it's silly, it's knowing, it's almost looking at the camera and doing stand-up. It looks really bad when it gets out in the sunlight, and it's just sort of being filmed as a whole body thing. So, for no analytical reasons, just gut feeling, the Absorbaloff.
Okay. For me, least favourite Doctor, probably Shooty. He gets a tiny era. He gets a bunch of duff stories. He cries a lot. We didn't really get a proper look at him to really compare him to the others. So almost by default, it's Shooty for me. Companion, that's easy. It's Amy Pond. From the moment she tried to jump the Doctor's bones very early on, ostensibly on her wedding night, something just tripped in my brain. Like, oh, you're one of those kind of people? You'd actually do that? Yeah, nah, thanks. No thanks. It really coloured her character for me. Monster or villain, I'm going to say Krasko from the Rosa Parks episode. Basically, He's just a ham-fisted attempt at political commentary, but it's so ham-fisted it comes across as really one-dimensional, really undeveloped. I'd be embarrassed for a friend to catch that story and think, oh, Rob watches this show? Rob likes this? Oh my God, I don't want to think about that. Season, I'll probably go with 7A because nothing in there really wowed me on the first watch. Nothing I'd go into bat for. Asylum of the Daleks, Dinosaurs on a Spaceship, Town Called Mercy, Power of Three, Angels Take Manhattan. None of those thrill me. And worst episode or story, perhaps it's just the freshest in my mind, but I'm going to say The Reality War was just shocking. Whether because of the stuff they didn't plan for, like, oh shit, we have to shoehorn in that Shooty's leaving, or whether it is stuff they made but then left out, like all the extra Susan scenes, or whether it was stuff they actually planned and thought was brilliant, like having a giant skeleton monster Omega, but like, what the f***? Yeah, that one.
Fair enough. I hope you liked our least favourite picks there. We have a double question here, in that basically it's the same question was sent in by a couple of listeners. Dylan Mooney asked, favourite singer band over the years, and John Bishop asks, I'd like to ask you both what sort of music you are both into, and could you do a top 5 of your favourite albums? And we thought, well, I think if by the time we get through our top 5 favourite albums, you'll get a good sense of who our favourite singers and bands are.
Oh, you say that, Dave, but I'm so old now, I've got different eras of music that I've been super focused on at different times. So, as a kid, it was like, oh, the Beatles and ABBA and 80s pop and rock, you know, Bangles, Bon Jovi, Guns N' Roses. But then the 90s began and my taste got into like UK indie stuff, like the Smiths and the Wonder stuff. And I got into the darker side of the 60s, like the Doors, thanks to the biopic. And I got into punk, like the Dead Kennedys. And then by the mid-90s, we had Britpop, and the alternative scene, as it was called, was in full swing. So not just, you know, the big names like Blur and Oasis or R.E.M. and Faith No More or the Red Hot Chili Peppers, but I also liked a lot of bands that were a rung or two down the ladder, like Suede, the Lemonheads, Gene, Veruca Salt, bands like that. Later in the 90s, I really got into Muse, and all along the way, there were random people that just didn't really fit my pattern at all, like Chris Isaak, who I absolutely love, but he's like none of these bands I've just mentioned. Basically, I could talk about 100 different bands at length because I really, really love music. If I had to convert it into a top 5 LPs, and again, this is from someone who owns hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of CDs, I'd say something like Dogman Star by Suede, Strange Days by The Doors, This Is My Truth, Tell Me Yours by the Manic Street Preachers, The Queen Is Dead by The Smiths, and Achtung Baby by U2. And even in just saying those 5 out loud, I haven't mentioned other albums by those same bands. I haven't mentioned other bands that I really love. So this was a very cruel question in some way, you guys. It was very cruel because I adore music.
I, on the other hand, am not really a huge music person. I obviously like a lot of music, and you know, I like a lot of non-pop music. I like show tunes, and you know, I could talk about what my favourite Elgar pieces were, you know, at quite a bit of length. But I'm not, you know, hugely into pop music, so I was able to just quite easily do a top 5 albums.
Okay.
So look, at number 1, I've got Let It Be by the Beatles. I obviously had to have a Beatles one in there. That I've been a big fan of them since I was a teenager, and the big revival and renaissance of the mid-90s came out. I could have had Sgt. Pepper in there, but I personally just love Let It Be. From Blink 182, I've got Enema of the State. There are a number of Blink albums I like, but Enema of the State is just my favourite. It's got some really good songs on there, not the least of which is, of course, All Good Small Things. Midnight Oil, an Australian band, and got to say, Rob Hurst died just a couple of days ago, Rob. So
yeah, very sad.
Yeah, very sad that the drummer of Midnight Oil and one of the big writers of their songs passed away, so shout out to him. My favourite Midnight Oil album, Redneck Wonderland, I think that just works so well as a concept album of just with just a real sense of themes and some great songs. I know the guys who got me into Midnight Oil would want me to say Red Sails in the Sunset, but no, Redneck Wonderland for me. From the Pet Shop Boys, although I really love a lot of early Pet Shop Boys stuff back from that when they were doing stuff like It's a Sin, Very just has just hit after hit after hit. It is just a really great album from the Pet Shop Boys, who I'm a big fan of. And finally, from the Moody Blues, their 1988 album Sous la Mer. Again, I could easily have Days of Future Past on there, but I just love I Know You're Out There Somewhere so much. I've gone with Sue Lemaire. The one artist that I feel really bad not having on that list and deserves a shout out is Elton John. A huge Elton John fan. The Very Best of Elton John was a formative double CD when I was a teenager, and in fact I have the song music of The Very Best of Elton John sitting behind me on the piano. I'm pointing, Rob, sitting right there on the piano behind me. I play it myself. And also, I probably should give a shout out to Affirmation. It was very not cool to like Affirmation when I was at high school, but I did. And looking at that, I realised of those top 6, 7 artists that I've mentioned, 4 of them are British, 1 American, 2 Australian. So I think I could say my favourite type of pop music is very classic British pop.
Very good. And Affirmation, of course, by Savage Garden. I have 2 of the albums you mentioned, Dave. The Beatles, of course, Let It Be, and Very by the Pet Shop Boys.
Lovely. Good to have some snaps there.
Yeah. Ian Sykes writes, what's the best possible thing that could happen for this next era of Doctor Who? A total reboot? And on the flip side, what would you most hate to see?
So, Ian, I've already spoken about the fact I would have gone back and done a total reboot and why in an earlier question. And so I'll copy and paste my answer from that one, frankly. I think that if it was right, in my view, to do a reboot 20 years ago, I think it's even more right now. I think that just unencumbering the show from over 60 years of history, from multiple doctors, we're up to 15, 16 doctors, the Daleks and the Cybermen and the Master and Unit, just so much. I would wipe the slate clean and do something really new, really fresh, and discover this universe again fresh with the Doctor. The thing that I think I would most hate to see would be if they went all the way towards cutting out what makes Doctor Who different and special. And my biggest criticism of the Gatway era, although I'm not perhaps as down on it as you were when you talked about it just then, Rob, my biggest criticism of it is that it just went a little bit too far into let's have mainstream appeal by losing what's most important about the Doctor and Doctor Who. He is an alien. His emotions and the way he thinks and the way he acts, the way he considers sexuality, all of these things are alien and different. And if you just go, well, he's just deep down a person like all of us, really, well, what's the point? I think that if they'd lost that completely in order to try and get, in inverted commas, mainstream viewers, that would be a real problem.
It feels like you're reading my notes, and you'll see why in a moment. I think the best thing would be continuing where we left off, not losing any of it, but going down the horror path. I have always said Doctor Who works amazingly well as horror, and horror is very popular with the audience out there. And by this, I don't mean horror in the sense of people pulling back shower curtains and waving around a carving knife. I mean possession, murder, cults, body horror, fear, all of that stuff. And I want a Doctor who is amused by all of this danger, and here we go, who is distant from humans, and who is occasionally unsettling because of that, because he is a frigging alien at the end of the day, which is why, yes, I think Ncuti Gatwa and all these, oh babes, I'm here for you, let's have a cry together, just left many people cold. In terms of what I'd most like to see, whatever else they might do, I don't want the mythology and lore to be over-explained. Chris Chibnall thought he was making the Doctor mysterious again by weirdly telling us all this brand new information, additional information about the Doctor. I thought that was quite nuts and a massive own goal, and I can't believe how he doesn't see that that's not making the Doctor more mysterious, it's just adding more information. Anyway, I'll get off that soapbox.
That's a really good point you make, Rob, and it's interesting that although I'm not a massive horror fan per se, horror seems to be the genre that's doing innovation really well lately, and a lot of the movies I've liked recently have been in the horror genre. I saw The Bone Temple last week, and it was a brilliant film. Weapons, a brilliant, interesting, innovative film. The Housemaid, a psychological horror. So, yeah, I think that genre is having a bit of a renaissance, and Doctor Who can be part of it.
Yeah, and again, I stress, not jump scares, not people with carving knives behind shower curtains, but more intelligent stuff.
Conceptual horror.
Yeah, exactly.
We have a question for you, Rob, from Carl Gardner, who asks, could Rob please spend a bit of time on why you're such a fan of the Fifth Doctor and how you respond to criticisms of him and that era?
Well, thank you very much, Carl. I've Always love the Fifth Doctor because he's fundamentally decent. He comes into a room assuming the best of everyone. He's not trying to dominate situations and have a dick measuring contest or outwit everybody just to show off. He has real empathy and he gives people a chance. And yes, I know people often say he's too nice. He's passive. He lacks authority. You know, he gets pushed around. But when people mistake that for weakness, I think they're missing that he absolutely does have a spine, because he can become as exasperated as Hartnell when he wants to be. He has a super acidic tongue and really nice turns of phrase that he uses on people when he thinks they deserve it. He just doesn't lead with that. And I like that. He doesn't bluster into situations from the start like, say, Colin would. I don't think it takes much of a leap to see why I like the McGann Doctor a lot too. I think he's also in that kinder and more thoughtful basket. So while the Capaldi Doctor sort of rants and raves about, just be kind, even though he's a total shit to people a lot of the time, Davo is genuinely kind until he has to be anything other than kind. And I really like that.
Oh, that's a lovely little summary.
Thank you very much. Did you want to say anything about him?
No, Rob, I think the question was for you, and I think that's a lovely little summary. I'll leave it to stand.
Alrighty. We're All Stories in the End podcast says, what are your favourite episodes of Star Trek and Blake 7?
Wow, that's a very big question. I'll be succinct if I can. Look, going through the Star Trek shows of original Trek, Balance of Terror, my absolute favourite. I'm also very fond of The Conscience of the King, both well-written episodes. Next Generation, and indeed my favourite Star Trek episode of all time, Chain of Command. Also love the Pegasus, but lots of great episodes. Deep Space Nine, we just talked about them, Rob, on our alternate galaxies, but in the Pale Moonlight and Homefront, a couple of favourites for me. Voyager, I haven't seen as much of, but I love Q2, and I do love Distant Origin, which is the dinosaur one. Enterprise, again, I haven't seen it all, but In a Mirror Darkly and the Andorian Instance, so there's some Trek ones. Blake 7, my big three, Rumours of Death, Orbit, and Trial, all just well-written, brilliantly acted pieces of television.
Alrighty. Blake 7, I famously say, starts with one of its best episodes in The Way Back.
That is true.
Scarcely improves on it, and in fact can be a lot worse at times during the run until we get to the finale and Blake. So I'm going to say either of those two at either end of the show. Star Trek, it really depends on the series. Probably nothing surprising here. City on the Edge of Forever for the original series. Best of Both Worlds for Next Gen, Snap on Pale Moonlight for DS9. I don't feel qualified enough to talk about Voyager because I never watched all of it. I have seen some of it, but not all. I never watched Enterprise at all. Discovery I gave up after 2 seasons and thought it was mostly crap, so I won't even try there. Strange New Worlds I never bothered with, so there's only a few I can really comment on, and hopefully that's good enough.
Yeah, I've seen all of Picard, all of Strange New Worlds, about half of Discovery, and because I've only seen them all once through, I don't really feel qualified to talk about all-time favourites, so just going with our childhood memories there.
Yeah, I guess I saw Picard. If there was a favourite episode, it would come from that 3rd season where the show actually got good, but I wouldn't know what the episode is.
No, and that's the problem. I know things that I liked more than others in those shows, but to sit there and go, it was that episode called that, I just haven't seen them enough. Along a similar vein, we have from Chris Curtis, favourite B5 episode, top character in the show. How do you think JMS would work as a Doctor Who showrunner? What would he do, in your opinion, to the format?
I can't go past the season 3 finale, Zahadum, where you have Sheridan on Zahadum, and he's been told if he goes there, he'll die. He has scenes with his wife Anna and the other people from her crew who are now serving the shadows. He escapes, he fights his way to that balcony. He's recorded the message for Delenn that we keep cutting back to. He calls down the White Star to just crash through the roof above the city. I get emotional even talking about it, the way it just comes in, full tilt. His wife screams, we cut back to the video, I love you, Delenn. Kosh tells him to jump, and I love the way he jumps like a man who doesn't really want to jump off a balcony. He doesn't take some dramatic swan dive. He does this really shaky fall over the balcony, and then boom, the whole place goes up. My heart is still in my throat decades later. That's how good it is. Favourite character is Londo, and I think JMS could absolutely work as a showrunner. We've discussed that many times on this show. because I think he's got a great science fiction sensibility. That doesn't mean Doctor Who would suddenly go into like Christopher H. Bidmead science fiction. I think JMS would still lean into quite fantastical things. But where he'd differ from RTD and Moffat and Chibnall, who are guys who have written all sorts of things, but were Doctor Who fans, so could sort of turn their hand to it. JMS is a guy who grew up on the cheap sci-fi paperbacks of the 50s and 60s, and he's devoured so much of note in sci-fi since he is a sci-fi guy, and he would make Doctor Who really sci-fi and tell great sci-fi stories, and that's why he'd be a great showrunner.
Yeah, that's a really good answer. My favourite Babylon 5 episode, I've always said Messages from Earth. I think that just gives you everything that's great about B5 turned up to 11. It's got massive, great arc revelations. It's got a really tight, gripping adventure. It's got spaceships doing cool spaceships. It's got great CGI graphics. The music's dialed up. It's got great character moments. I just think it's a really good summation of Babylon 5. Picking my favourite character, I mean, that's hard. So again, I just sort of closed my eyes, cleared my mind, and gone, who is it? And Londo came to my mind. So, he's just such a great character, and the journey he goes on across that show, and the acting by Peter Jurasik is just incredible. So Londo, look, I agree with you on JMS. I think he'd be great as a Doctor Who showrunner. I think that his writing is very witty, which is very different to very quippy. I think that recent Doctor Who has been very quippy, whereas I think JMS is very witty and clever, and we'll see a lot of that. And like you, I think that he would do just out there bonkers sci-fi concepts and maybe a little more of that sort of conceptual thing. But JMS is still a very big relationships writer. I mean, a lot of his work is very grounded in people's friendships and loves and relationships. Yeah. So I don't think we'd lose that aspect. I think we'll just get a more traditional sci-fi vibe, I think we could say.
For sure. Anthony Carroll asks, what do you think you would do if Doctor Who had flopped in 1963? Example, you'd have more money. Lol.
Wow, Anthony, you're asking the tough ones tonight. I could almost make a joke and say, is Doctor Who all about the friends we've made along the way? But a very large part of my engagement with Doctor Who is about the friends I've made along the way. I mean, you look at the guys who come over here and do Gin and TARDIS with me. I've known those guys, I've been kicking around with them for 30 years. Literally 30 years. And there are others in fandom that are just the same. Some of my deepest, longest friendships, people whose wives I know, weddings I've been to, kids I've met, they are friends from Doctor Who fandom. So that would be a significant wrench. And that's before you get to more recent friends, people like yourself, Rob, who, we can catch up at a pub and spend 2 or 3 hours just chatting, enjoying each other's company. People from other countries and other cities that we've met online or in person through fandom. That's a really big part. But Doctor Who has been a big defining part of my life. It's been something that I've collected. It's been something that I've enjoyed. It's something that I've talked about, obsessed about. And if it wasn't that big thing, look, I think I may still have seen Doctor Who, because my dad certainly would have watched Doctor Who in 1963. He would still have loved it. And in the same way that, one day I get home from school and he's got a couple of Blake 7 tapes from the video library, I could imagine getting home from school and sort of, hey, there's this weird show that flopped in 1963. Let me show you the episodes. I'm sure I would have watched it and enjoyed it. Something else would have taken its place. Would I have become a hardcore Star Trek fan? I mean, I'm a big fan of Star Trek now, but a lot of my devotion to Star Trek was curtailed because Doctor Who was first. So, particularly as a teenager, there's only so many VHS tapes you can buy, only so many books you can buy, only so many books you can read. If Doctor Who wasn't there, would I have gone hard down the Trek path, joined a Trek club, possibly met some of the same guys I met in Doctor Who fandom? Yeah. I don't know, but it's such a big part, Anthony. Like, just taking that out is years of my life gone.
Yeah. If we take this fantasy world to still contain everything else, it's only Doctor Who that flopped, then I think it would just mean more time with other genre shows or films. And Star Wars was always something I was massively into, more so than Doctor Who at various times growing up. So actually maybe that wouldn't change much at all. I was already at sort of peak Star Wars. So maybe like you, something like Star Trek, which I always devoted some time and attention to, I would have devoted more time and attention to and been an actual fan. That's the most obvious thing that comes to my mind. And yeah, it's quite nice to think that maybe we'd have been in Star Trek fandom, David, and a Star Trek podcast.
Yeah, and I think we both still would have loved Blake Seven. I certainly would have. We would have loved B5.
Sure.
We would have loved Buffy. But there wasn't quite the fandom around them in Australia that would have taken the place.
No, that's true.
Another from Dylan Mooney, who asks, thoughts on David Bowie and his very close shaves with Doctor Who, and in general about his genius.
Sounds like Dylan likes David Bowie. I'm always leery of David Bowie's stories, not just in relation to Doctor Who, but in a general sense, because he was so big and he stretches across such a period of time, and he was so adored. It's like any historical figure you read about, and you have to wonder, is half of this even true? I mean, sometimes it is. There's the story of him seducing Tina Turner. That's absolutely true. It's quite a story. But then you'll hear stuff like, oh, he was meant to be in this show or this movie. And you think, oh, wait, was this actually someone asking him or putting a contract in front of him? Or was this just some pissed writer in a pub saying, you know, Bowie would be good for this, we should get Bowie. So could he have been XYZ characters? I guess, sure, if the idea went anywhere and he was asked. But I reckon many of these stories we hear, he wasn't actually asked. It was just an idea. Putting that aside, what a talent. You know, I'll be honest and say I'm not the biggest fan of Bowie's in the sense of knowing all his stuff half as well as some of the bands I mentioned earlier. But then again, I'll listen to his Low LP and say Always Crashing in the Same Car is one of my favourite songs on that LP, and many people out there who just know his radio songs will have no idea what I'm talking about. So I must be somewhere along the spectrum to being a fan, but I don't think I'm a huge Bowie fan at the same time, if that's not a too fence city answer.
No, I think it's an honest answer. And look, Bowie is someone I really admire from what I've seen of him, but not someone I've really bumped up against a lot in my life. Dad wasn't playing his music when I was a kid, for example. I don't know why, just he wasn't. And so, look, do I know his classic songs that are always turning up in TV shows and on the radio? Of course I do. Do I think they're brilliant? Of course I do. But I don't really know a lot more than that. So I'll just mention when he rocks up in Extras with Ricky Gervais, that is one of the best guest appearances there.
Little fat man.
Who sold his soul. Little fat man who sold his dreams. Yeah, that is a brilliant moment. And I also do remember when I saw many years after it happened on YouTube the Freddie Mercury tribute concert. His duet of Under Pressure with Annie Lennox was just the standout moment of that concert. So look, every time I have bumped up against Bowie, I've thought he was brilliant. It just through the laws of only so many minutes in a lifetime, I haven't seen more of him, and yeah, but that's probably something I should correct.
You know what I like best in that video from the rehearsal, when Annie Lennox starts letting rip, you know, why don't we give ourselves one more chance?
Yes.
And Bowie's just looking at her like, oh, you can tell the look on his face like, oh, this is good. But then they cut to George Michael, and George Michael's on the sidelines singing along. Yeah. And he's just like being a fan, and I'm like, oh man, I love George Michael.
Yeah, no, you know exactly the moment I'm talking about, and yeah, it's wonderful.
Oh, it's great. Where All Stories in the End podcast asks, what do the Virgin/BBC books mean to you, and what advice for a fan wanting to start them?
That's a really interesting question. I've spoken many times before about how they were an important part of my fandom. They were my era of the show when I was a teenager, really getting into fandom, and they were a gateway drug to other sci-fi fandom in books. It's from them that I discovered the Timothy Zahn Star Wars books, which made me a Star Wars fan. It's from them that I started reading the Star Trek books, the Red Dwarf novels, all of those sort of things. So they were really important, but I want to perhaps say something a little bit new and different, which is now what I've discovered is that there is a generation of people in fandom, roughly our age, Rob, who also grew up and shared this collective experience, whether it was their childhood years or their university years or somewhere in between. We're in a sort of a 10 to 12 year bracket that it really meant something to us. And that is the age now that is really starting to dominate podcasting. I think those people who grew up with the sort of the you know, with Tom Baker as kids are not around fandom quite as much anymore, and those people who grew up with the new series are not doing podcasts as YouTube and TikToks. So there is this sort of wonderful community I'm finding across a number of podcasts now who all are as nostalgic for these books as I am and all love talking about it. Or you do get podcasts like Too Broad, Too Deep, which is all about a younger fan discovering those in the company of somebody who read them at the time. So I think that it's become this lovely little society of people who are all looking back at our childhood as we each approach middle age and just remember them really fondly. And that's actually been a really lovely thing in Doctor Who fandom in the last maybe 3 to 4 years.
Yeah. We've talked a bit about music tonight, and it's similar in music groups on Facebook. Like, I've been on, and I still am on, a Suede discussion group. And for people who are 18 when Suede's first LP came out, like I was, we're obviously all the same age still. And we've had all the same experiences, and we're all 50 years old now. And you meet up with these people, and it's just really nice to be in a sort of a group of like-minded people who've gone through similar experiences. But to get back to the question, the Virgin books are still a mostly unknown territory for me, even though I've collected the full set of NAs and MAs. So they don't mean a lot to me, which sounds awful, but I think you know what I mean by that. I didn't grow up with them, and I haven't read them, so they can't mean a lot to me. Whereas the EDAs and PDAs were more my jam because I was coming back into Doctor Who and I read them all at the time. Although when I try and reread some of them now, the typeface is so ridiculously tiny. I think, how on earth did I ever read this stuff? And that's quite funny. Advice for people wanting to start them, I think, is just do some research first. Listen to some podcasts about them or read articles about them and try and find an in to them. Research what a small group of novels within the larger group of novels might be. Like in the 8th Doctor Adventures, there's that Earth arc where it's like half a dozen books or whatever it was, where he's just stuck on Earth. And you can just read those as their own little thing without trying to read all of the books from the start. Or in another range, if you have a particular character, maybe it's, I don't know, Bernice Summerfield, just read all the Bernice Summerfield books or something like that, just as a way to get in without having to read all of them. That's how I'd approach them anyway.
Yeah, I was going to say I certainly wouldn't approach them with an intent to read them all in order. As a starting point, look for authors or monsters or characters that you are a big fan of and start with them and see if you bump off them well. But if you wanted a nice little sort of microcosm of the Virgin books, I would say read the Alternate History Cycle, which is 5 really, really good books. If you get nothing out of those, you probably aren't going to enjoy the range, but I think they have the best of all the different styles the books can offer.
Excellent.
From Mark Cockram, who has occasionally sat in this chair, metaphorically speaking anyway. Would you rather have a hand made out of jelly or an armpit that dispensed ice cream? NB, you could eat the jelly and your hand would grow back over time. There would be enough ice cream to fill 1 cone a day, but it might have the vague taste of armpits.
Well, we did say ask us anything, Dave, and that's certainly anything. I guess the only good answer here is the hand made of jelly. It would be quite curious to look at and experience having a hand made of jelly, and if I could cut it off or eat it and my real hand came back, that would be good. I think the armpit dispensing ice cream, I have so many questions. Is it on demand that it does this, or does it just drip constantly? Is there dairy product coming out of a hole in your body constantly? I mean, that's just nightmare fuel. So the jelly hand, please, all the way.
I think there's only one answer to this, and it's the ice cream.
Really? Armpit ice cream?
Because what would you do with a hand made of jelly? That would be utterly useless, and ice cream is delicious, and having it on demand every day I think would be fantastic. So, Mark, you've split us on that one.
Well done, Mark. Our next one's from Rosa McPhillips, good friend on the socials. Lads, what are your day jobs? Dave is always hinting at something to do with politics, but what? If he's the head of ASIO or something, then fine. I don't need details. But the gist of both your backgrounds would be interesting. Also, I think Dave mentioned something about a military background too. As an ex-military man myself, I'd be interested to hear more about that. There's not many of us that can tick the veteran and Who fan boxes. But sorry, Rob, I do want to hear about you also. Well, thank you, Rosa.
Thank you. I'll answer that without trying to be too boring. Yes, I did serve in the Royal Australian Air Force as an officer. I did aerospace battle management course and became an air defence officer, which involved working with the FA-18s, and I was mainly posted to RAF Williamtown, north of Newcastle. In terms of my day job, I work for a member of the Australian Senate as an advisor, work with him on campaigns, policy, speeches, and all sorts of nitty-gritty things that go on there. He is currently a senior member of the front bench, so there's a lot of work on policy development and estimates hearings and all of that sort of thing. I'm very, very cautious about mentioning it, not because I have any shame of it or anything like that, but inevitably if you speak with too much detail, you end up giving up which side of politics I work for. And those who've been long-term listeners probably have sussed that out. But I just think that my personal view is podcasters talking about their personal politics and, who they voted for in this election, if they're pro or against Brexit, or they do or don't like this politician, I find really boring on a Doctor Who podcast. So I try not to fall into that trap. But that said, I've had some really good discussions with people, and I think people of very different political views can all be Doctor Who fans. I give the example of someone who's written into this podcast with a couple of questions, Anthony Carroll, who also I know works in professional politics. We've chatted about that a couple of times. He and I would agree very strongly on a couple of issues, and I know he and I would disagree very strongly on quite a few issues, but we still chat and talk about Doctor Who a lot, and I think that's great. But yeah, look, I don't like to go down the party political route if I can help it, because I'm here to talk about Doctor Who.
As for me, I'm a public servant. I work in a government comms team, so I'm politically neutral. And how I got there was originally journalism, and IT journalism specifically, back in an age where we still had magazines. And I ended up as an editor on a couple of those magazines, which fulfilled a childhood dream of mine, which was really cool. Then I moved into public relations for the money, frankly, and worked with some big agencies that had IT clients. They really loved having an ex-IT journo on board for obvious reasons. Then that morphed into working with broader clients, which is how I fell in with Paramount Pictures, first through the agency I was with and then working directly for a time. One of my colleagues who I worked with in the Sydney office at Paramount actually married one of the producers of the Transformers films. Like, what the hell? That was a bizarre and cool time for me in my work life. But my current job in this comms team, I've been in for over a decade now, and very, very happy.
Excellent.
Thank you.
From We're All Stories in the End podcast, was Gatwa a success or failure?
I think when we break it down, Dave, it's got to be a failure. I mean, only making 2 very short seasons, never meeting the Cybermen or the Daleks, being known for being that bloke who cries in every other story. He doesn't have the best Who resume. That doesn't mean, though, there aren't moments in his era where he doesn't give an interesting or even very good performance, or that there aren't stories that were genuinely all right. There were, and we called them out on the hot takes when we thought we'd seen something decent. But broadly, I've got to say, failure.
If you're judging as a piece of art, I can't say that his era is a failure, because there are people who loved his era, there are people who loved many of his episodes, there are people who discovered Doctor Who through Ncuti Gatwa, and I know there are people who found a new relationship and a special relationship with Doctor Who because of aspects of the Gatwa character that really deeply resonated with them and was very important to them. So, like any piece of art, if it's found people who love it, it's not a failure. But in a much more dispassionate sense, did the Gatwa era lead to an upswing in viewers, an upswing in fans, and the continuation of the series in a new and exciting direction? The answer is no. It lost viewers over the course of its 2 years, and I'm comparing it to itself there, not compared to any other era. It lost viewers over the course of 2 years, and it was effectively cancelled by its co-funder at the end of it. So, empirically, failure. Artistically, who am I to judge?
Okay. 2 questions I think we can intertwine here, Dave. We're All Stories in the End podcast asks, what's your favourite period of history? And Chris Curtis asks, which historical moment needs a renaissance? Drama and film tends to gravitate to certain key points.
Look, I'm a very, very big history buff. There's a lot that I love, but Maybe it's a cliche, maybe it's obvious, but Tudor England is absolutely my favourite period. I have books and books and books on the subject, and less so Henry VIII as the others. I'm a big fan of Henry VII. I think he was probably England's greatest king, but I also am fascinated by Edward VI and Mary I and Elizabeth I, and indeed Mary Queen of Scots and the way that they interacted and sort of moving into the Stuart era. So huge, big fan of that. Shelves of books on those topics. A historical moment that needs a renaissance. I think the Glorious Revolution. I think that moment when Britain and the British Parliament said, we decide who the king is and we will pick our king, or in this case, king and queen, and they deposed James II and VII. They brought in William III and Mary II to be the new king and queen. That is a fascinating moment in terms of politics, in terms of parliamentary democracy, in terms of parliamentary sovereignty, in terms of a king being deposed, in terms of a Dutch king arriving with an army and going, I'm now the king of England. Everyone's like, and we're kind of cool with that. Catholics versus Protestants. I think that there's a lot of great drama in the Glorious Revolution that deserves more attention.
Alrighty. When I was younger, I had a real thing for World War One and ancient history in a broad sort of sense. So, Alexander the Great, Greeks, Romans, all of that. And I still love all that stuff. But there's always new things to explore. And I recently finished the audiobook of Crimea by Orlando Figes, which was about 18 hours long and delved really, really hard into the religious aspects behind the Crimean War in the mid-1850s. Which was a period in history I knew something of. I certainly knew who was involved. I knew where it was fought. I knew a few of the big battles. Everyone knows the Charge of the Light Brigade. But I was really dumb to understanding it more fully, especially this religious angle. So I really bettered myself through that book. And I actually think the Crimean War would make a good backdrop for a mini-series on TV. I think it's too complex to do as a film if you're going to get all the aspects in there. If it was a film, I think you just do one of the big battles. Yeah, the Crimean War I'm into at the moment.
Yeah,
I think that needs a renaissance, yeah.
Yeah, no, and relevant today.
Yes.
A question that you're the only one who could even come close to being qualified to answer, Rob.
Oh?
Ian Key asks, will the Beatles World Cup ever be completed?
This is a question for John O'Park. The World Cup was his podcast. I was just a guy who turned up and recorded a batch of episodes every now and then that he could drip feed out. It's also true that after some big delays on his side after a while, and Jono runs his own events company in New Zealand, he's got a staff of people he has to look after and pay their wages and all of that. He's a busy dude, so there were delays. And I told him I didn't want to do it anymore. But his firm intention at that time was to replace me and to record more episodes. But a year or two on from that conversation with him, or is it even more, he still hasn't. So, sorry, but nout to do with me, Ian. Nout to do with me.
No, I have nothing to add to that one.
Alrighty. Peter Field asks, what are your favourite contributions of Australians and our diverse culture to science fiction?
I had a long think about this, Rob, and in the end I realised that there was a really wonderful moment of YA sci-fi and fantasy that happened when I was a teenager in the 90s that I think deserves more attention, because there was a period where Australian television realised that technology and effects that were coming up in the 90s were just good enough that you could make good sci-fi or reasonable looking sci-fi on an achievable budget in Australia. Yep. And turned out some really good and innovative YA sci-fi fantasy. My favourite of all of those is Spellbinder in 1995, which was all about a teenage boy from Sydney who finds himself in a parallel world where technology has gone through what seems to be a magical sort of term, but when you actually get down to it, it's just a very clever and different application of science. And he's in this sort of dystopian alternate world to ours, ruled by the Spellbinders. Then he's got to get back and all the rest of that. And I just found that was a really interesting series and one that I can remember kids would come home from school and talk about watching. They also made stuff like Ocean Girl, which wasn't as big a favourite of mine. It was really, really big in 1994 to 97, which was set in the near future on this sort of whale studying institute, and then they met this ocean girl who had this connection with whales. It was all very strange and weird. But also something like Thunderstone at the end of the 90s, which was a proper dystopian future. There are these survivors of the human race in this underground bunker, and there's this destroyed world above them, and they've got to explore and find the Thunderstone. Australia was just making in the 90s some really good sci-fi that I think deserves a lot more attention.
Yeah, I've got something that dovetails with that in a moment. But I'll begin by saying it might sound weird, but I think Australia's biggest contribution to sci-fi is tone. Mad Max, which I appreciate is more speculative fiction, so it's that umbrella that sits above sci-fi and a few other genres, gave us that survivalist future where civilizations collapsed, and a million people have copied it since. It sounds like Thunderstone might have been a bit Mad Max itself, Dave. I never watched it, though. Then you have something like Farscape, which was an American show, but it was made here, and it was massively influenced by Australians, and it was very messy and weird, and it felt very un-Hollywood a lot of the time. So I think we bring this sort of no bullshit dark humour to sci-fi. We don't sort of do cheesy. We don't do chest beating. We don't do that sort of stuff. And a question like this, as I thought about it, actually makes me wish over the decades I'd been more interested in Australian sci-fi authors. Because there'll have been some great stuff lurking out there in, little-known novels that might have sold in the hundreds or the low thousands, and I've just never heard of it, never read it. But it's one of those things you need to stay really informed about, I think, and probably go to a bookshop every week and talk to the booksellers about, what Australian authors are putting stuff out. Because I'm a bit dumb to Australian sci-fi authors. But I think the tone in shows like Farscape and movies like Mad Max, I think, has influenced a lot of people.
Yeah, and also the size of the country, in that if you're filming sci-fi here, you have huge oceans, huge beaches, huge rainforests, huge deserts, huge cities, huge like you could film alien landscapes in Australia far better than you can in the UK.
Yeah, absolutely.
A question from Neural Foundry, who says, the classic era seasons have such distinct personalities depending on who was running the show at the time. I've always found that the balance between gothic horror and campy adventure in some of these seasons creates something that I don't know if modern Who could really fully replicate. What's your take on how the production constraints of that era actually shaped the storytelling?
Yeah, for sure the constraints shape the storytelling. I think a big part of that is when your alien is just a guy in a rubber suit. The story has to do something really interesting as a story. That's why I think so many classic stories are really about big topics, like colonialism in The Mutants, or fascism in Genesis of the Daleks, or class and power in something like The Sunmakers. The monster or the villain is almost incidental, so it doesn't matter that it looks cheap. It's just a delivery system for an idea. The storytelling gets lost in modern Who, I think, where the effects are much better. So they're not trying to cover up the fact that the villain or the monster is crap or the effects are terrible. So they can go a bit more light on with the stories, and maybe that's a reflection on the modern audience too, like, oh, they're all going to be on their phones, let's not make this too deep and meaningful. I think it's in that sort of realm. That's where my answer is.
I was going to say pretty much word for word exactly that.
Oh, really?
I'll also just add as well that I think the expectations of children's viewing has changed significantly. I've said before, I have a lot of friends in Doctor Who fandom who, like me, watched the Hinchcliffe era either first time or as repeats many, many times as we were growing up in Australia. And I've said to them, would you let your 8-year-old kid watch The Seeds of Doom? And they've gone, absolutely not. But we all did. We all grew up with that sort of stuff. We all grew up watching Astro Boy shoot machine guns out of his ass and nobody blinked. Now they grow up with Bluey. It's a different world. Kids have different expectations. Parents have different expectations. So I think that affects things as well.
Agreed. Damien Alexander asks, are the rumours true that Graham wasn't really qualified to be the scientist on The Goodies?
Well, the factual answer to that is that Graham was a qualified doctor. He was qualified in medicine, though never practiced. So that's close to being a scientist, but no, not quite. The actual, probably honest answer is that Graham played that role so brilliantly and so perfectly and wrote such great scripts with ability that I don't care whether he was qualified or not. He was the right man for the job in the right place at the right time.
Yeah, I can't really add to that. He certainly was the most sciencey of all the goodies in real life, so that's good enough for me.
Yeah. Gareth Bowley writes, favourite film score and composer?
Well, being my age and not answering John Williams would make me seem very contrary and weird. So it's John Williams all day long. He's soundtracked the movies of my life, even if you just think of Star Wars and Indiana Jones, just extraordinary. So I'll try and be a bit different for the film score, though, and say Gladiator. I think Hans Zimmer writes some incredible music for it, but then you also have the secret sauce in the form of Lisa Gerrard, who's an Aussie singing this totally made up language, which makes it feel very weird and very ancient, but somehow timeless at the same time. And it just adds a whole new dimension to the orchestral stuff that Hans is banging out in the background. And I think that's a really cool aspect of the soundtrack, that vocal from Lisa Gerrard that's on a lot of the tracks. So I'm going to say Gladiator.
Well, you got very close to each other there, Rob.
Really?
I have to give an honourable mention to John Williams, of course, and shout out to Empire of the Sun and Jurassic Park as two of my favourites. But when I look at my shelf, and from the period when I bought CDs of the film scores that I've got on CD that I have bought, they are almost all by Hans Zimmer.
Okay.
My favourite is probably The Rock. I've listened to that again and again and again. That's a wonderful score. Crimson Tide is always up there. That's a brilliant score. He did the orchestration for all of the music between the songs that Elton John and Tim Rice did in The Lion King, and something like King of Pride Rock is a wonderful piece of music there. But The Power of One, Pearl Harbor, and more recently June and June 2, I just think he's epic. So Hans Zimmer and The Rock for me.
Nice. Dylan Mooney asks, what is your favourite stage show you have ever seen?
I've seen so many shows on stage, it was really hard for me to pick one. I'm going to give you three favourite moments, all of them on Broadway. The first was seeing Bernadette Peters singing Send in the Clowns in A Little Night Music. That was a moment when I just looked around and saw an entire theatre was just in Bernadette's hands as she sang that wonderful, wonderful song. In a similar vein, I got to see Ben Platt in Dear Evan Hansen, and the moment when he did For Forever, and indeed You Will Be Found, but For Forever particularly, again, was just absolutely extraordinary. And then they did a revival performance briefly on Broadway of Sunset Boulevard, and they got Glenn Close back to do that. And when Glenn Close sang With One Look on stage in Sunset Boulevard, it was again just this is just an absolutely wonderful experience. So although none of them are my favourite musical or show, they are three really special moments for me from stage.
Very cool. Similarly, I've seen many things on stage over the years. Either stuff I was interested in seeing, or stuff I got freebie tickets to when I was a journalist, or stuff I took journalists to when I worked in PR. Or my first wife was actually a trained soprano. I don't think I've ever told you that before, Dave. And
No.
she used to drag me along to a lot of operas and things because she was really into opera because she could do it as well. And it'll sound terrible. I've probably forgotten half the stuff I've ever seen. But maybe something like Wishful Drinking, which was Carrie Fisher's stage show, which I know I'm picking for very sentimental reasons now that she's gone, but that was very funny. And there are other shows I've seen where it's someone who's meant a lot to me, like one of the Pythons, like I've seen John Cleese do his stage show. I've seen All Three Goodies on stage here in Sydney when they first got their sort of second wind and decided to do, stage performances again. The sheer presence of some of those people just elevated whatever the show actually was.
Yeah.
John Cleese showing clips and telling stories he's told a million times, but it's John Cleese on stage.
Yeah.
So stuff like that for me.
Lovely.
Yeah.
Peter Field asks, what is the future of physical media? How does it retain its value for the next generation of consumers?
I had a good think about this, and I think for the next generation, they're going to read an article about or hear a podcast about a great TV show or movie and think, oh man, I want to see that. And it won't be on streaming, and it will be out of print on DVD or Blu-ray. So I think the second-hand market for rare and interesting things will become quite a hobby for some in the future. It'll be like the early 90s where I used to go to record stores to find rare CD singles and things, basically for their B-sides, and it was impossible to get these B-sides anywhere but these out-of-print CD singles. And that got killed off as a hobby as things got reissued or albums collected B-sides together, or eventually things ended up on streaming. Like, oh, you want the B-side from that single from 1989? Press this button, you can have it.
Yeah.
You know, where's the fun in that? But I think TV and film is different. Some things won't end up on streaming because of rights issues, or maybe there's even just a perceived lack of interest to make it worthwhile for the streamer to pay for it and put it out there. And the only way to see this stuff will be that used market. There's also another issue of things being edited when they're on streaming, while the physical media will be the real deal, the real version of whatever that particular film or TV show was. I think that's going to be important too, but I won't go down that rabbit hole. So I just think it will be very exciting for young people in the future. It's actually the kind of treasure hunt I'd like to be involved with myself. It sounds so exciting, except I nearly own everything I need on physical media right now.
I think all of that is true. I just also have the additional note that there is a gene in some people that likes to have a collection and likes to be able to put something on a shelf and go, that's mine, and I've got a set or I've got a collection of similar things. And so I think that will always have some value to some people.
Absolutely. And finally, Dave, our final question for the evening, where All Stories in the End podcast asks, who are your real world heroes?
Yeah, this was a tough one, Rob, because I'm not someone who really sort of thinks in terms of heroes. I think philosophically I draw a lot of my values and my inspirations from some of those great classical liberal or Gladstonian liberal thinkers and leaders like Pitt the Younger and Gladstone himself. They were really important. I've got a really strong love for RFK. Not so much JFK, but RFK. I think that the work that he did in so many areas, and particularly what he did to shape classical liberalism in the modern era in the 60s, was really, really important. But also, I can't go beyond a couple of sporting heroes. Craig Bradley, who played the club record number, 356 games for Carlton, and I just remember watching him basically for my entire life until I was 20-something, watching this guy just play football year after year after year so well, captain the team, played in our 95 premiership team, just a really, really great guy. And I've met him and a really lovely guy. And also just, Steve Waugh, captain of Australia, the greatest captain of the Australian cricket team, the captain when I was, young and really into cricket and going all the time. But just his leadership of that team, his leadership of the country in some ways, and just his ability as a batsman and a cricketer. He is one of the greatest cricketers I've seen play just as a player, but as a leader who just led a team to victory after victory after victory. Just absolutely astounding. So, yeah, maybe a bit of a mixed bag there.
We have a snap.
I can guess who it is too.
Yeah. This was a hard question because there are lots of interesting people in the world, but I don't really idolise people now at 50 years old in a way that I might have done when I was younger. In my 20s, I quite like Steve Waugh. Yes, the Australian cricket captain. I'm even born in the same city as Steve Waugh.
I share a birthday with Steve Waugh.
Is that right?
And Steve Smith. We all have the same birthday.
Wild. But yeah, I liked his attitude and all of that. But you reach a certain age and the Australian cricket captain or whoever else is now younger than you. and it feels slightly absurd idolising a younger person.
Yeah.
So also people can become such disappointments over time. Now, I never idolised Neil Gaiman, but I don't know how someone who did would feel about him now. Or a Joss Whedon. I can't say I idolised him either, but I really loved the things he created. Now it's a much more complex dynamic. So
just to interrupt, I know a guy who used to host a weekly trivia night that we went to for many, many years, and he did a lot of stand-up comedy and performances and kids' birthdays, and his hero was a very important Australian performer, Rolf Harris.
Oh dear.
And that ended badly.
Oh dear. He didn't do a like Jake the Peg tribute show or anything, did he?
No, but he would say that like a lot of his performing style was that sort of old school Rolf Harris variety style, and he talked about having to take the signed photo off the dresser one day and just put it away.
Yeah, gosh. A lot of people would have had his artwork too, because he was a prodigious artist as well. Look, the older I get, I think the more suspicious you become about someone turning into something you didn't expect. So maybe best not to idolize them to begin with. But if I had to nail my colours to the mast and keeping with the tone of this show and all of that, how about like George Lucas and Steven Spielberg? You know, just two great creative people now in their old age. I don't think they're going to let us down. Just great guys.
No, lovely.
All right, well, that's the end of our Ask Us Anything segment. It went on for a while, but I hope it was interesting. We'll do another one in another year or two, maybe. We'll see. Right now, we have some listener feedback, and as has become the norm, we haven't been able to include everyone's comments this month, and some have been trimmed for brevity, but we do really, really appreciate everyone who leaves a message. We do read them all, and we're also going to hold over any comments on last week's Deep Space Nine Alternate Galaxies episode until next month, in the name of, just keeping the show to a decent time tonight. So let's kick off with Adrian Sturrock via email and his experiences with the Virgin New Adventures. And apologies, Adrian, this is a great example of a letter we had to cut down quite a lot, but we enjoyed reading the whole thing ourselves. Happy New Year, Rob and Dave. Wishing you all the best for a very happy and healthy 2026. Over the last couple of years, I completed a reread of a good chunk of the Virgin New Adventures range of novels, and I would like to share my thoughts. I own 55 of the 61 books in the range and was able to track down PDF copies of Lungbarrow and The Dying Days, so had pretty much the whole range to choose from. I decided to avoid reading the ones that are poorly regarded or which I remember not enjoying. I ended up reading about 40 books in total. I had previously read these books only once or twice before, and some of them not for 30 years or so, with the exception of The Dying Days, which I was reading for the first time. So, how did I find the range this time? Overall, I enjoyed the books more than I thought I would, but no doubt this was helped by avoiding the novels that were bad or dull. All of the novels I read had something to recommend them, whether that be an interesting plot, interesting characters, unusual ideas, great comedy, etc. In terms of individual authors, I found that I didn't enjoy Paul Cornell's and Kate Orman's books as much as I did before. They are both very talented writers, but the constant attempts to try to be clever did wear thin after a while. In addition, Paul's apparent obsession with shagging Ace and or Sophie Aldred, and Kate's obligatory torturing of the Seventh Doctor, both became quite tiresome. Mark Platt wrote a couple of very intricate and carefully thought out novels that added a lot to the lore, but were also quite impenetrable. We also had, I believe, the first published Doctor Who work by one Russell T Davies. I really enjoyed the first 2/3 of his novel Damaged Goods before it became a big mess towards the end. This would be the first time, but certainly not the last time, that Russell failed to stick the landing. In fact, having a climax with a great big piece of alien technology stomping around, destroying parts of London, reminded me a lot of The Next Doctor. Because I'm a Doctor Who fan, I naturally ranked the novels 10 Original Sin, 9 War Child, 8 Happy Endings, 7 Lucifer Rising, 6 The Also People, 5 Cat's Cradle, Warhead, 4 Just War, 3 Conundrum, 2 Time Worm Exodus, and perhaps surprising in first place is Andrew Cartmell's Warlock, the middle novel of a trilogy. It's strong stuff featuring drug dealing, animal experimentation, and sex trafficking, but I found it utterly compelling. Some of the best TV Doctor Who stories have been unlike anything else, such as Genesis of the Daleks, Seeds of Doom, Caves Vendrazzani, Blink, Midnight, and Heaven Sent. And while I have loved those stories, I'm also glad that TV Doctor Who isn't like those stories every week. Warlock is the NA equivalent. I loved it as a one-off, or I suppose a three-off, considering Cartmell's novels are all linked, but I'm glad that not all the novels were like that.
Thank you, Adrian. As Rob said, I did enjoy reading your full email, and that was really, really interesting. I do get where you're coming from with Cornell and Orman, particularly Cornell. I've reread all of his books in the last year or two, and they were all good, but they all came with a yes but. And I do think that sometimes things that were very innovative and new and fresh in the 90s now feel dated in a way that something like a Terrence Dicks book that's just writing in a sort of a timeless fashion doesn't. Your top 10 is very different to mine, but Just War, Conundrum and Exodus would all be on my list as well.
Nice one.
On our top seasons of classic Doctor Who episode of The List Makers, we have from Anthony Giuliano, who says, I had a couple of snaps with you with seasons 2 and 14. I love both of those seasons. I'm not entirely certain what my other three would be, but I know those two would be.
Homer at Homer's Twin says, excellent this show. I would have been terrible at this. 12, 13, 14, 7 and 10 are my top 5, really lacking variety, but I love all 5, so I couldn't pick any others. Season 7 saved Doctor Who for the long term.
Aye, aye. And Constable Hansy via YouTube says, I'm with you on season 7 first, then 13, then 19. Was surprised neither of you picked that one. Season 3 and season 14. That was harder than I thought. They've all got their positives.
Yeah, I mean, I've gone into bat for season 19 before. I like it more than Dave does, that's for sure. I couldn't find a place for it, though, in the top 5.
No, I was surprised too.
On our final episode of 2025, which was looking at the Unicorn and the Wasp and Time Heist, Holly Flynn via Facebook says, I actually view Time Heist as a romp. I've rewatched it a few times. It's a bit of a comfort Capaldi episode for me. Fun twists and turns, scary villains, and lots of heart. Keely Hawes is good in everything, and this was no exception. Also cool to see Jonathan Bailey well before he became a Hollywood heartthrob for his roles in Bridgerton and Wicked. Side note, funny that Rob mentioned Spooks. I rewatched a couple of seasons this year as it's one of my favourite shows. Quite a few plots and themes have aged badly in there too, but still great acting and high stakes. Matthew McFadyen was great as Tom, and he brings us full circle as he is Keely Hawes' hubby.
Some good references there, Holly. A comment from Homer's Twin on X. Great listen whilst running some of the Christmas excess off on this freezing morning in Scotland. Warmed me right up, and away to watch them both this afternoon. Thanks for the great shows over these 10 years.
Well, thank you. Dylan Mooney via YouTube says, a brilliant, fun discussion as usual, guys. Time Heist is always overlooked, even by me, who's probably watched it 7 or 8 times at this stage. Quite a fun episode, though. Thanks for the hours of entertainment in 2025.
No, thank you. And it sounds like a lot of people went out and rewatched those episodes again after quite a while, so that's a pretty cool thing.
It is. It really is.
On to our top nostalgic Doctor Who stories episode of The List Makers, and Simon Threadgold on Bluesky says, Battlefield, watched an original broadcast age 6. The Invasion, my first VHS. The 8 Doctors, a perfectly timed read when I was stuffed with classic Doctor Who and loving all the references. Paradise of Death, memories of listening on headphones during many car rides. Spectre of Lanyon Moor, what got me hooked on Big Finish. I'd say from that list, Simon, we are very similar ages.
Sounds like it. Peter Field via Facebook says, for me, at number 5, Vengeance on Varos, I remember my grandfather cracking it with the John Dar torture scene and making me change the channel. I was so pissed off, but I could do nothing. Number 4, The Silurians. The release and impact of the virus haunted me for years. Number 3, Resurrection of the Daleks Episode 1. I dubbed the episode on cassette as we had to go out to something as a family, and I had to experience it in audio. My mind was racing. At number 2, The Day of the Doctor. I took my 10-year-old son to the cinema in Ballarat to watch this. When Tom says, "You know, I think you might," I experienced extraordinary emotions. And at number 1, The Green Death, because my dad would watch the show with me after he finished work. He'd have a bottle of Melbourne Bitter, some cheese, Cabana, and the Savoy biscuits. He'd always say to me, "Do you remember the one with the maggots?"
I just love the reference to Savoy biscuits.
I love the references to Cabana, which I had to look up. We call it Cabanossi up here, Dave.
No, it's definitely Cabana.
Nah, it's Cabanossi.
No, Cabana. Chad Wilson via Bluesky. Warm and interesting listen as always, gents. My list. Hand of Fear, first memory of Who watched in my nan's front room, my safest place on earth. City of Death, specifically when the Jaggeroth is revealed. Proper fear for ages afterwards. Robot, first VHS borrowed from the library. We were very late getting a video. Survival, lots of people chatting about it in college. Great to find fellow Whovians just as it was finishing. The 11th hour, me, my wife and children all watching Who together.
Nice. Rod Pales via Facebook. Lovely episode, guys, and have enjoyed the podcast for some time. As requested, here's my own nostalgic memories about the show. Number 5, State of Decay, a kid's excitement about a fresh-looking season 18 as the show tumbled brilliantly into the 80s. Number 4, Caves of Androzani, for all the obvious nostalgic reasons, but especially the dramatic episode 1 ending and early regeneration. Number 3, School Reunion, I was really moved by Sarah's return. Number 2, Mordred Undead, awesome story and flashback sequence. Then later in life I was walking around the school locations during a long, hot London summer with my mates and having a great day. And at number 1, Genesis of the Daleks, my earliest and so my most nostalgic Doctor Who memory, Sarah falling from the gantry. Tapping this out has reminded me of the fun, lifelong memories this tremendous show has given me. Also, that nostalgia is not only the stories, it often comes from the people around you at the time.
So true. Some very cool and different picks there, Ron. I like that.
Yeah.
And finally on this topic from Blaine Coughlin, love this. My top 5 nostalgic stories are 5 Full Circle. This is my first memory where I definitely remember watching Doctor Who on TV. I distinctly remember the cliffhanger where the Marshman emerged from the swamp. 4, the TV movie. I was at university and a load of friends all came to my student digs to watch the VHS before it was broadcast on TV. Number 3, The Day of the Doctor. Very early on dating my boyfriend, now husband, we went to see this together at the cinema in 3D. Oh, lovely. Number 2, The Daleks. I had watched this mythical The Five Faces of Doctor Who, so I'd seen An Unearthly Child, but buying the VHS of the first Dalek story was the first time as an adult I was able to watch and luxuriate in a William Hartnell story. And number 1, Time and the Rani. Our family bought a VCR in 1987, so this was the first Doctor Who story I was actually able to keep. I literally watched it several times a week for months. I still feel incredibly happy watching this.
Wow. Blaine might have seen Time and the Rani most out of anyone in the Western world, Dave. Maybe. Finally, on our Stranger Things edition of Alternate Galaxies, Very Pete Lambert on Bluesky says, a really good listen. As someone who's enjoyed Stranger Things, but not to the extent of rewatching it, you filled in a lot of memory holes. I'm really interested in Will's coming out scene because modern TV always has to decide what to do about period authenticity with homophobia. Characters everyone sees as good would in reality have a pretty high chance of reactions we'd now all see as bad. And side note, that was kind of where I was going on the show with my comments.
Yeah, absolutely.
As an 80s teen who didn't come out until 20, I thought it was nice for him to get statistically unlikely unanimous support and then just crack on. But as you said, it's silly that lesbians in the room had nothing at all to say. In comparison, For All Mankind, and I think that's on Apple, Dave, is it?
I'm not sure.
Oh, I think For All Mankind's on Apple. Yeah. For All Mankind is brave enough to show a good character reacting very badly to a coming out in the 70s. But it has the time to spend years dealing with that. To be honest, if I was writing Stranger Things, he'd have come out during a Demodog scene, but I'd get fired for unsubtlety pretty quickly.
No, some really good and honest thoughts there, Pete. I appreciate that. And also on Stranger Things, Chris Brown via email. I want to thank you guys for covering Stranger Things in its entirety. On many Alternate Galaxies episodes, I'm just glad to hear your takes on series I haven't followed, but was particularly curious about Stranger Things because I hadn't kept up with it. Similar to Australia, here in Japan, our Netflix rollout was years behind the States, and I am pretty sure Stranger Things was the first big worldwide release to also hit here day and date and not require alternate sources and methods. I remember going into the first season on a high after watching the promos, luxuriating in that nostalgia, as did Rob. I think we had very similar reactions as a whole. We really enjoyed the series and used it to promote Netflix to friends who weren't aware of the service. When the second season arrived, unfortunately, I could sense cracks. Likely, it was the formula transforming to sustain an ongoing series, but my enthusiasm waned. Previously, my wife and I had watched Lost via DVD rental, another series with an initially mysterious and engaging premise that, had I been watching in isolation, I'd have dropped not long into the second season. With Stranger Things appearing amid a glut of viewing options thanks to streaming, there was no pressure to continue, so we never got into the third season. I actually had no idea where the plot went until listening to your recent episode. I'm glad you two were willing to summarise it for me.
That must have seemed so bizarre when we started saying, oh, the Russians build a base under the local shopping mall.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In the Stranger Things season gap, Netflix had dropped another sufficiently similar series that also captivated us from the get-go, but in that case, it proved to be a show that never lets up. Given Dave's love of all sci-fi series well plotted, Babylon 5 and Deep Space Nine are standout examples, I really hope Rob can now push him to give Dark a chance. Simply put, it was the alternate galaxy Stranger Things. Another show leveraging 80s nostalgia, but with slightly different touchstones riffed on and filtered through a German lens. Dark was also a direct benefactor of Netflix's push into international markets. It was localized content promoting on an international platform and given a chance to break through, as Squid Game famously did. Critically, and quite unlike Stranger Things, Dark had plotted its 3-season arc from the get-go, and even saying plotted does the series a disservice, because I think it is safe to say narrative works have never been constructed to this deliberate precision before or since, and apparently made possible through software assistance. Again, it would be spoilers to say more, but given proclivities and narrative payouts, I've just got to wonder how Dave would receive it, and as Rob might appreciate, it is worth a periodic rewatch. Please consider it for an episode going forward. Either way, guys, never stop doing what you do so well. Looking forward to the next decade of the show, Chris.
And I've got to say, we had a listener write in last year or the year before mentioning Dark, and I've more recently mentioned Dark to you, Dave. I think when we were watching Stranger Things, I was like, yeah, you should be watching Dark. It's very good.
Okay.
I'll just leave it at that. It's really, really good.
All right, I've made a note.
And I'll just say one thing. When Chris says its precision came through software assistance, just in case anyone out there's like, oh my God, was Dark written with AI? I hate AI. No, it wasn't AI. As I recall, the people who made Dark used a database and put all their information into the database. So if they had to look up who was who or who was here at what time, because there is a time travel-y kind of element to it, they could know exactly what was happening when and where. And that's what he means by it being plotted. So, they're Germans, of course it's plotted well, you know. So, yeah, that's what he means by that. It wasn't an AI thing. No.
No, I've made a note, and that is something I could very definitely watch in the future. But what have we been watching this month, Rob?
Dave, since last time I finished Deep Space Nine, which anyone who heard our Alternate Galaxies ep will know, now that I've spoken about the series, I watched The Invasion for no reason, except I felt like watching it, and it's still bloody great, just a great Pat Troughton story. The Night Manager Season 2 is currently airing weekly on Prime at this very moment. That's very watchable, and a really good continuation of the first season from years and years ago. I'm still watching Fallout Season 2, which is fun. I watched Diamonds Are Forever to tie in with me currently reading all the Fleming Bond novels at present. I'd forgotten how bloody awful that movie is in places. And a new batch of Rick and Morty episodes dropped back in the Christmas holidays. My wife and I have knocked through them very slowly. We're basically savouring them because you don't get many at a time, and they're always just so funny and weird. I love Rick and Morty.
Cool. I've watched a few things over the Christmas New Year break. I finally got around to watching all of Children of the Stones, that classic sci-fi fantasy kids series. It's meant to be a kids series, you wouldn't do it today, from the BBC, starring Gareth Thomas. That was as interesting and spooky and thought-provoking and weird and baffling as everybody says. I'm really glad I checked that out. I finally got to watch Lockerbie, A Search for Truth. Very well done. I think the first couple of episodes where they're actually dramatising stuff around the accident of the fallout was really good. As it started to get into sort of one man's take on the investigation and his theories, which a lot of people don't agree with, I thought it lost a bit of momentum, but interesting. In Our Blood was a story about the Australian response to the AIDS crisis in the 1980s, complete with them watching Sweet and Sour at one point, reference anybody who was watching ABC television in the 80s. Look, it was very good and very interesting. From a drama point of view, though, when I compare it to UK and US series set in the same topic at the same time, Australia's response to the HIV crisis was world-beating and world-leading, and so it has a much sort of less dramatic and less harrowing result than other series, which was interesting. Finally, I did get HBO so that I could watch all of It Welcome to Derry, which I really enjoyed. The first episode had a couple of just amazingly brave gut punches. It was really good. And then some other really cool moments as it went through, particularly towards the end. I got a lot out of that.
Very nice. Some interesting stuff we've been watching, both of us.
Yes, but what are we doing next time, Rob?
Next time, Dave, we've decided to have a classic story deep dive, which is going to be voted by you, dear listener, as always. There'll be a poll up on X in the near future after you hear this to vote. Who should go first?
Go on, Rob. You've been leading us.
All right. I'm going to go with the fabulous Baker Boys, Dave. I'm going to go with Tom Baker in State of Decay, and I'm going to go with Colin Baker in Attack of the Cybermen.
Attack of the Cybermen. Both very cool stories I would be very interested in watching. I'm going to go with Pat Troughton in The Mind Robber, and I'm going to go with McCoy in Battlefield.
Nice. Oh, what a vote for people to have to decide.
What a vote.
On.
I have no idea who would win that one. But that's for next time. Rob, I think this will be our record-length monthly show, but that's because you sent in so many questions. I hope you found the answers worthwhile.
Yes, they say start as you mean to go on. I don't think we'll go on with 2-hour episodes for the rest of the year, Dave, but it's been a lot of fun for sure.
It has. I hope you got a lot out of that, but we'll be back with a classic story next time. Don't forget to go vote.
Yes, vote early, vote often. That's what they say, isn't it?
Yep, sure.
But until then, I've been Rob.
And I've been Dave.
And we'll see you next time on the Doctor Who Show.
Goodbye.
Goodbye. You've been listening to
The Doctor Who Show with Rob and Dave.
Find us online by searching for
The Doctor Who Show.
We also love it when you write in. Drop us a line anytime at hello@thedwshow.net.